Ah, hmm There it is. Yeah, wash him out. Yeah, get rid of him. There you go. Maya.
Good morning, Timothy, and good morning, everybody who is watching us on LinkedIn, listening to us in Clubhouse, and also watching us again on YouTube and Facebook. It's a pleasure to have you with us this morning, and it's even a greater pleasure to have Timothy Langley getting ready, or no, he has already prepared for today's live stream and the session of Japanese politics, the 148th session. Timothy Langley survived yesterday's hike, which was organized mostly by Richard Woughton, who is with us in Clubhouse. Richard, thank you so very much for the wonderful event, for all the history lessons you gave us. You talked about, you took us to those amazing places with the scenic views. I think that everybody had a wonderful time. We got almost 30 people there. It was really great. So thanks again. And I'm looking forward actually to the next event. Hopefully it will be in the end of January. So let's see how that one goes. And Timothy, I don't want to keep you any longer waiting. So I'm giving you the floor and let's start.
Great. Thank you very much, Maya, and good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. You know, last year we had a blockbuster presentation. Our audience swelled to more than 100 people. But you might recall that I kind of tempted you by hitting like or share or something like that so that we know where everybody is and who everybody is. And I actually gave you a couple of seconds to do that. So please take time now to do that, to hit like or share or provide some sort of comment so that we can see that there's a fingerprint of you who are joining us either on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or on Clubhouse, because these numbers are really important to us. And also it affects the algorithm. So whatever you can post for, whatever your insights are going to be, or maybe just hitting like, it's a great benefit to us, and it's kind of just you telling us that you appreciate what we're doing. In fact, you might have noticed that as a consequence of Maya asking people, what can we do better? We started producing a synopsis of what my talking points were before the next briefing. And I didn't do it this week because I never got any kind of feedback or reaction that this was appreciated or people liked having this kind of synopsis. So it takes a little bit more time, but if it's appreciated and look forward to, then I'll continue to do that. So please give me a little bit of feedback there. So today is the 148th episode of Tokyo of Japanese Politics One-on-One, 148 consecutive briefings every Sunday. We are here to bring you what's going on in contemporary Japanese politics that's important to you. And there's actually a lot going on. I think that we are seeing the signs now of the demise of the Abe faction. There's an awful lot going on there. The chief cabinet secretary, one of the top leaders within the Abe faction, resigned on Friday, late Friday. Mr. Matsuno, he gives 2 briefings a day. He's on television all the time, and this scandal has really begun to take form. As you know, the extraordinary diet session ends on Wednesday next week. And while members are engaged in political activity in the session of a diet, once a session of the diet is implemented, they are immune from prosecution. So until the 13th, there's not likely to be any police action, but there is police action being considered. So I think probably on Thursday and Friday of next week, it's going to be very robust. The prime minister was really on the hot seat on Friday. He and his chief cabinet secretary were being quizzed a lot. They tried to dodge it, and then it came out that Mr. Matsuno had received more than 10 million yen accumulated over a 5-year period for kickbacks on party tickets. We talk about party tickets pretty frequently here. I attend maybe 5 a week. I pay a fee. I'm part of the kind of group supporting a particular diet member, a particular faction. And this is how they generate legally political funds to run campaigns and to seek re-election. And it is a legitimate way of doing that. You pay, you study, you get a briefing, you get a lunch, and there's a little bit left over from paying the hotel for the lunches and for the venue. And the scandal today is that there was a professor in Kobe University, Kobe Gakuin University, who did a little bit of research into the amount of money that was generated by these political benkyokai, and he cross-referenced it with the amount of money that was reported by the political factions or by individual members of the parliament. And he came up with a discrepancy that was so huge and so shocking that he went to the police and he filed a criminal complaint. So that's what's going on now. Members of the parliament, political factions, there are 6 formal political factions. 5 of them have been indicated as participating in this scheme. It's been going on for more than 5 years, but they have a 5-year cap on it. And it's all the big guys. It's the Fukuda, it's the Abe faction, it's the Aso faction, it's the Kishida faction, it's a Nikai faction, it's a Motegi faction. And all of these faction leaders are implicated in some way of having received money and not reporting it. So earlier in the week, it was reported that the Nikai faction was also participating in this scheme, but they were reporting it. So for tax purposes, if the faction has a party, or if you have a political party and the funds go to the faction can rebate part of those faction or part of those funds that you generated back to you. But you have to report them, and the faction has to report them. So the Nikai faction was reported to have been in compliance with the reporting requirements, but that began to fall apart as Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday filtered down. And so now the Nikai faction is also looking very guilty. So the police are involved, and the number one kind of violator turns out to be the Abe faction. And this is interesting. It's kind of not unusual, because the Abe faction is twice as big as the second largest faction, the Aso faction. Mr. Abe has, or the Abe faction has 99 members, and the Aso faction, I think, has 58 or 57 members. And then there's Motegi, there's Kishida. But with the Abe faction, it looks like it's been a really well-organized scheme. And the money and the distribution and the reporting requirements are all determined by the person who is in charge of the faction politics and the faction accounting. And that's usually attributed to the head of the faction. So in the Abe faction, you've got 6 members, 5 members who are in this consortium of very powerful Abe faction members. And these 5 are all very much involved in Japanese politics. Mr. Seko is the chief representative, or the cabinet, the secretary for all of the LDP members in the upper house. He's an upper house member. You've got Mr. Nishimura, who is the METI minister. You've got Mr. Matsuno, who was the chief cabinet secretary. You got Mr. Kishida, who is the prime minister and the head of the LDP. So there's a lot going on there that has fingers pointing at the people who are actually in charge of running the government. Mr. Kishida has actually been so shell-shocked by this that on Friday, he actually tendered his resignation as the head of the faction that is called in colloquial terms, the Kishida faction. And typically, when a member of the parliament becomes the prime minister, he resigns his post as prime minister. Only Kishida has failed to do that. He didn't do it he didn't want to relinquish his grip on the faction. He wanted to keep control of that. And so in a unique manner, Mr. Kishida has held on to that faction position. You're supposed to actually resign from faction politics because you are the prime minister of the entire coalition of political parties and LDP factions, in fact. So he resigned, and it looks a little bit kind of guilty that he's finally taken this much time, and it's the faction head that is ultimately going to be responsible for that. In the Abe case, you've got originally Mr. Hosoda, who was the faction head, while Mr. Abe was prime minister. Then Mr. Hosoda resigned when Mr. Abe resigned as prime minister. Then Mr. Abe became the faction head, and Mr. Hosoda became the Speaker of the House. And then Mr. Abe was assassinated, and then Mr. Hosoda died maybe 3 weeks ago, and obviously Mr. Abe had died. So the two leaders of the Abe faction have they can't be stood up and asked questions and share the guilt. So that guilt will go to the 5 people who are running the Abe faction, and it is predictably the fall of the Abe faction. I don't think it's overstating that. The amount of damage that's really building up is so huge, and what's going to happen is somewhat unpredictable. So on the 13th, next week, or this week on Wednesday, the Diet session closes. The emperor will travel across the moat in his limousine. He'll march up the stairs. He will open the Diet, and he will close the Diet. And it's a lot of fanfare going on there, but they will close the Diet, and then the public prosecutor and the police can move on various members of the Diet. And it looks like there are going to be a couple of arrests there. And the arrests are going to be these major political figures that we talk about all the time. And this thing only happened over the course of maybe 8 days or 9 days. We reported a little bit about it in the last briefing, but it has exploded over this last week. And it does smell like there's a bit of a rat in the works, that this professor in Kobe could come up with this theme about the political funds, and then he could file a police complaint, and the police complaint really began to take fire. And the reason why I say it smells like a bit like a rat is involved in this is because the professor from Kobe is not, he's not available to get all of the deep information that is reported in the police complaint. He had to have somebody on the inside feeding him this information. And the most likely individual to be feeding that is somebody within the Abe faction who was pushed aside, who was treated a little bit brusquely, and wasn't part of this gang of 5. And he now wants to get a little bit of revenge, and of course not be implicated or indicated in this kind of scheme. But I think it will come out in the wash, and it's going to be a very nasty end of the year for the Abe faction. In fact, I think I'm going to pull my notes together. I'm going to have a briefing. If you recall, I did a briefing about 3 weeks ago on the automobile industry and the auto parts component of the Japanese economy, and it was maybe a 16-minute clip that we circulated. Maya actually shot it and edited it, did a great job there, and we got a great reaction from that series, and we're going to follow up with another series that I think we will upload in maybe 10 days. I'll shoot it in about 8 days, and we'll upload it immediately. And I think the title of that, because a lot is going to fall out since then, but in anticipating this, I think the title of that maybe 15, 20-minute clip will be The Fall of the Abe Faction. I'll be joined on that by Dan Harada, who most people know as a political maven and a fixture within LDP politics. So please look forward to that, and we'll continue to move forward following this really incredible revelation, the Abe faction potentially moving towards its demise. And I think probably in this next week, you're going to find a couple of more people potentially resigning from the Kishida faction. This is terrible for the prime minister, as you know, if you've been watching the show, that his numbers are just in the toilet. And anything that he can get, he went to Dubai for COP28 last week, and it didn't generate any goodwill towards him, or nobody was slapping him on the back, or talking to their neighbors about how lucky we are that we have Mr. Kishida, focused on COP28. That didn't make any difference. People were talking about, what's this thing with the funding scandal, and how come you're still the LDP faction leader, even though you're the prime minister? And it looks like, as the leader, aren't you responsible for counting the money and making those reports too? So it is really huge. In previous episodes, we in considering is there going to be a snap election? Is the prime minister, does he have enough wind in his sails to have an election with any hope that after the election, the LDP would be in a better position than it is beforehand? And there's just been nothing there. So we have predicted that probably after the extraordinary diet session, there would be a Christmas break, the New Year's break. The diet would start again in the first week of January and go for the constitutionally mandated 150 days. And then we would roll into September, where that is the time for the prime minister's, the LDP, re-election of its party president. And I think probably the most likely scenario, talking about from 2 weeks ago, was that the prime minister in some form or fashion would just trudge through and he would still be the prime minister. Right now, I think that's all up in the air. So we're going to continue to look at that. It's still a little bit unclear because it's been happening just over the last 6 days. But I think by the time we do this report on the Abe faction, I think we'll have much better clarity on that, and I'll keep you informed. You also recall that we've been talking about the Unification Church. The Unification Church is the church that is blamed for this assassination for Mr. Abe. All of the people who joined the church, the accolades, the believers, the people who joined the affiliation, and then they would donate their money. They would, donate their land and their house because they became true believers. And the organization, 30 years in existence, continued to grow, and their wealth began to be really massive. And they were following in the footsteps of Soka Gakkai and Komeito to form a political appendage to the church. And they were well on their way to doing that. And then this whole thing came up, and now I think it's in the courts now to withhold or actually extinguish their qualification as a religious organization. And when that happens, all of the funds that they have amassed, the land, the cars, the hotels, the buildings, will now be not religious funds, and taxes have to be paid on that. So before that happens, there is a great suspicion, and it's probably very likely too, that the church will be selling these assets now while it still has the church status, get a fund from that, and then take those funds and send them out of Japan, so that when the final bell tolls and their church status is relinquished and the tax authorities come in, that maybe they've squirreled away enough, not everything because it's just too massive. So there were 2 bills that were offered. We talked about this in the last couple of weeks. 2 bills were offered to kind of handcuff the Unification Church from selling assets or from calculating assets or from doing anything like that. One bill was sponsored by the LDP and Komeito, and the other bill was sponsored by the opposition party, predominantly the Constitutional Democratic Party. And the reason for the Constitutional Democratic Party coming up with a separate bill is because they are afraid, they have it on good faith notice, that the LDP, since it's so tied in with the Unification Church, is going to soft pedal the bill. So they came up with their other bill. The bill was voted on this last week, and it was kicked up to the upper house, which means it'll probably become law before the 13th of next week. And that is the bill that was promoted by the LDP and Komeito, and then the Democratic Party for the People joined in to support that bill, so it looks like it will pass. And as a consequence of the Democratic Party for the People joining in, there was a fracture within that party. We reported this last week that the leader and the sub-leader, Mr. Maihara and Mr. Tamaki, they had a big fight. There was an election just recently. Who's going to be the leader? Mr. Tamaki succeeded. He continued his status as leader of the Democratic Party for the People, the DPP. But there's a lot of bad blood between the 2 individuals. And when the DPP voted with the LDP to pass this bill, it was in exchange for something else that the DPP could brag to its constituents that we got for you. And this just angered Mr. Maihara. He immediately tendered his resignation, and he started a new political party called the Free Education Throughout Japan Party. uh, so this party has maybe 5 members now, perhaps 6 at this time. And it's like the NHK party. It's a single issue political party. He's got 5 members now. And just to see how Japanese politics works, that was done. I reported on this last week, so it's probably a 10-day-old, 15-day-old story. And then the prime minister announced just this last week that he has a plan for universal education for all people up to the university, um, certainly for people in the lower income bracket, but for anybody that has 3 kids. And there was a requirement that for 3 kids to get free education all the way up into university, they had to supply some needs test, but that's going away. And he's earmarked 3 trillion yen to accommodate that. And of course, this is if you're going to have kids as a consequence of knowing that they're going to have free education, or maybe you already have 3 kids. It's a long rollout, but he has announced that. And then Ms. Koike, the governor of Tokyo, just announced this last week that she is going to implement free high school and junior high school education throughout Tokyo. There is a needs test there, but if you can think about the DPP forming a new political faction, a new political party under Mr. Maehara's leadership, and their sole purpose is to have free education. Both the excuse me, both the prime minister and Ms. Koike now have just pulled the rug out from under him. So the purpose of him realizing this need for Japanese consumers to have free education, and for people to slap him on the back and be congratulatory to him and maybe vote for him and his political party will grow, that's kind of being pulled out. So it's an interesting way of seeing in the flesh how Japanese politics works. If you're going to do this, I'm going to do that. So all of the things that you think, the benefits you think you're going to generate, we're going to hopscotch earlier and take charge of that. So it's a real interesting way that people get their own retribution. And I think seeking retribution is also the core issue of this political funds, particularly with regard to the Abe faction. I think there's some unrequited love that somebody wants to extract, and I think that story will come out. I have my own suspicions, but probably in the next 2 weeks it'll be much clearer. So please look forward to that. Let me see what else we've got. The Chief Cabinet Office reported that GDP contracted over the 3-month period from July, August, and September. They've got the numbers, they've chewed them up, they're spitting them out now, that the entire GDP contracted 2.9%. We kind of knew that, and there is a bit of a lag, and they don't like to announce bad news unless they absolutely have to. But this report came out this last week where the Chief Cabinet Office reported that the contraction was due to consumers not spending very much money, and the fact that wages increased about 1.5%, but consumer prices increased 2.9%. And when they say 2.9, you can bet your dollar that it's probably more than 2.9, but they're trying to sugarcoat it as much as they can. And you've probably noticed it yourself. I mean, if you're living in Tokyo, that there's not a lot of enthusiasm. People are out on the streets. People are shopping and that sort of thing. But you don't notice this vibrancy of the economy. And in fact, overall, the Japanese economy is dependent on foreign imports and foreign revenue rather than having an engine of growth in Japan that supports it. So it's kind of like food self-sufficiency. Japan doesn't have food self-sufficiency. It relies on importation of food. And similarly with the economy, there are things that the government can do. They haven't been doing it very well over the last 20 years. And this is really a worrying thing. On the other hand, the yen strengthened considerably. Let me see, 20 days ago, it was at 151. You remember that? And the yen came in yesterday at 148.86. That's huge for it strengthen that much over such a brief period of time. In November, it was 151, and today it's 148. I'm sorry, 144. So the bond prices also are increasing. So there's a lot of money flowing in because people see that there is an opportunity in Japan. What they're apparently what they're waiting for is that the Bank of Japan is going to readjust its philosophy on negative income. I mean the easy money policy that has been going on for 12 years now, where money is freely available to corporations and individuals at rates that, I mean, it's basically free. You don't pay too much of an interest rate on borrowing money, and the Japanese government and the Bank of Japan is pushing that, please borrow money, please, invest in infrastructure or in rolling stock or in hiring people. And it looks now like with the new Bank of Japan governor, Kazuo Ueda, that he's going to make an announcement. They have their Bank of Japan meeting this next week on the 19th. So you have to look out for that. People are watching that. They finally go public with what their interpretation is of the current status and what they're going to be doing moving forward. So the 19th will be a big date for that, and we're going to look forward to it and report it to you. Let me see. I reported about the DPP split. The other thing, I think I've got two other issues I want to talk about. The Osprey crash, we noted that last week. There was an Osprey that crashed off the coast of Kagoshima. And at the time that we reported it this time last week, it was a crash, and the United States government had reported to the Japanese that unfortunately we have an obligation to report to you. There was an unscheduled landing that we experienced, and we're trying to be transparent and report that to you. It wasn't an unscheduled landing. It was a crash. There was a rotor fire, and the Osprey crashed into the sea. And as of today, we know now that all 8 of the crew perished. And as the story begins to unfold, it turns out that all of this particular Osprey was assigned to Yokota. So there are 6 Ospreys assigned to Yokota, and the one that crashed was one of the ones. So it's likely that any one of these guys who are flying, they're all under 30 years old. They're soldiers, they're Marines. You might have run into them here in Tokyo as they're partying in Roppongi or whatever. So it's really close to home. And I had initially thought that perhaps there were some Japanese self-defense forces who were involved in the crash. But I think on reflection, the Marines, the U.S. Marines, although they do joint missions with the Japanese self-defense forces, because of Article 9, the Japan self-defense forces doesn't have an expeditionary force like the U.S. Marines. So when you think of an expeditionary force, it is to attack and to take over and to retake property or an island, that sort of thing, or just to be, ass kickers. And the self-defense forces, since its self-defense purpose is paramount, they don't have that kind of expeditionary force. So I thought about that after the Osprey crash and the fact that all of them were U.S. soldiers. President Biden made a comment about it this last week at the White House too, because it's a unique and a kind of shocking accident. Up until today, the Ospreys have been rolled out predominantly in Japan. They are used in other theaters, but they're predominantly here in Japan, in Okinawa, and now as this accident kind of revealed, more all over Japan, all over the archipelago, they have Ospreys that are flying. But the only accident in the past, there was only one accident in the past where there was a fatality. And this last week on November 29th, or 2 weeks ago, there were 8 deaths. So it's a big shock to the system. Are Ospreys reliable? Are they something that can continue to be the workhorse, because they're taking over from what the original workhorse was the Huey helicopters, and these big, powerful helicopters that were used, and they're still used in other theaters too. So the question remains there. The Japanese government said, we want you to ground your Ospreys, kind of from the American perspective, that's kind of bold. Hey, what the hell? We're here protecting you. We had an accident, so sorry about that, but don't try and kind of push us around and say that we need to ground all the ospreys. That's a huge cost, and it creates lots of downstream problems. We can't do that. They finally acquiesced, and they grounded, except for search and rescue operations, all the ospreys. So this dynamic between Japan and the United States, it continues. The Chinese jumped on that one and criticized the Americans for exploiting their power over Japan and forcing down the throats of the Japanese citizens, all of these impositions that they have on the the airspace and what's going on in Okinawa. So there was a bit of a field day over this last week. It's going to continue. We're going to continue to watch it, so please stay tuned. Finally, you might have missed this, but they discovered, you of course know where the British Embassy is in Tokyo. It is on the outside rim of the moat that separates the palace proper, where the emperor lives, from the regular Nagata-cho, or from that area. So the British Embassy holds a particularly choice piece of land. It received it, I think even before the war, it received this plot of land and built an embassy there. And they sold part of it off to Mitsubishi Real Estate. And so the embassy kind of collapsed a little bit, became a shorter footprint. And then Mitsubishi was going to build a nice mansion there. What a great spot. It is right next to the building that's called the Tojo building. And Mr. Tojo was one of the architects of he was the military, I think he was the Minister of Defense, actually, during World War II. So this plot of land has always been very influential in Japanese politics. But what they did when Mitsubishi was clearing the land and they're getting ready to build this huge mansion, this condominium complex, is they discovered from the Yayoi period evidence of 28 buildings. And they think that there are far more that spread over to where the British Embassy is built just next door. So there's a huge excavation going on there. If you like that sort of thing, I do. It's now kind of closed. I think it can be viewed by people who are walking by there, but it's very interesting when you think about it. And in fact, I think those of you who know me know that I'm a bit of a I don't know. I just love the Japanese history and the building of the Edo Castle. And I've got a couple of stories that I've written. I think Maya has posted one of them on my LinkedIn profile, talking about what Edo was before it was Edo, and how Tokugawa came in and founded the city of Edo, and how he decided to build his castle here. And it turns out that this moat was all flat land. There was no moat there. There was a Hira River that ran through Tokyo, and they diverted it when they were building the castle and the embankments and the moat. And so the interesting thing is that this piece of land, and before Tokugawa came in, it was just a backwater. Nobody paid much attention to Edo at that period of time. But it comes out that the Yayoi remains found date back, the Yayoi period is 200 BC to about 250 AD. So they found 28 buildings in that category. And this is a small piece of property that they've excavated. They know that there's far more. I think they've excavated maybe 270 meters of, 3,700 meters, but the total is more than twice that. But they also found buildings from the Jomon period, and the Jomon period goes back from 10,000 BC to the beginning of the Yayoi period. So this is really interesting, an interesting discovery of when the Edo, before it was even called Edo, that was all a flat piece of land. And for those of you who don't know, the moat system was built by Tokugawa. It was excavated by hand. No beasts of burden were made or were used. And the whole thing surrounds the imperial palace. There are concentric three rings of moats, and it's just an incredible feature. It's the largest castle that has been built by mankind, and it has a unique structure where the protection is not just by a closed circle, but it actually has a kind of a spiral. So attacking armies would be pushed into the spiral and get into a close, more and more constricted space and more open to attack on both sides. So it's a unique castle. It's a huge feature of Tokyo. When Tokugawa established this city, he did it in a pre-planned fashion. He's got Yasukuni at the north side. He's got the administration at the east side. He's got the commerce of the city at the other side. And at this particular point in time, you might not know this, but the city was all in Shitamachi. The Tokyo Castle was in the backwater. This was way before any development was going on towards Shibuya or Roppongi. This is all backwater back then. So the whole part of the city was Shitamachi, formerly known as the Venice of Japan, actually. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you because the castle plays a huge role psychologically, geographically in Japanese politics, how it works, how it has evolved. So it's an interesting feature that I like to talk about, and you can read that article. So I think, Maya, that's about it. I know we're going to have lots of Q&A. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, I would really appreciate if you showed some sort of an appreciation by hitting like or posting a comment or coming up on stage so that we can better calculate. We had 100 people in the room last week. I hope it just continues to grow, and I really appreciate Maya initiating this briefing 3 years ago.
Yes, we had 100 people across the 4 platforms we live stream upon. So that's how it is. So thank you for pointing this out, Timothy. Hopefully the audience will grow. And yes, we have questions in Clubhouse already, and also another one. Yes, some comments on LinkedIn. So I will start first with the questions in Clubhouse, if you don't mind.
Okay.
First of all, yes, we have from Gerard O'Sullivan. Gerard, thank you very much for that. Okay, so first of all, Timothy, to your prompt to everybody in the room there. So Gerard wrote, "Good morning. Oh, that kind of synopsis would be appreciated." This is a reference to the synopsis of the rooms, which you prepare every week. So, well, you already know that. Okay. And then the next one is, the question from Gerard
Thanks,
is,
Gerard.
Timothy, who do you think was the insider in the
Yeah.
Abe who
So,
pulled them out?
Yeah, it's it's really a rich mosaic of a lot of players. So, first of all, you will remember that when Mr. Abe was prime minister and he was being attacked by the Morimoto scandal, that was the school that was set up with his wife as kind of the head of the school. You remember that scandal? And they were really coming close and hitting hard on Mr. Abe. And it was really coming down to the wire. And at that point in time, it was near the spring. So there are bureaucratic movements in the spring. So people who have a position, they usually rotate in the spring. April 1st, they take their new positions. And most of these positions are 3-year terms, and then the bureaucrats move to someplace else. And at this particular point in time, the chief prosecutor, who was friendly to Mr. Abe, he was supposed to retire. And that's what's written in the law. You really can't mess with that. And the person who was going to accept that new position, it was already pretty well laid out, was somebody who really had a bone to pick with Mr. Abe. So Mr. Abe used his magic and it kept this favorable public prosecutor in office until the scandal kind of blew over. So when you're talking about culprits, I think the professor in Kobe didn't need a whole lot. He had a very fertile ground with the police because they still want to get back at Mr. Abe for that frontal assault and that diminution of their authority and their prestige. I mean, they're really mad about that sort of thing. So that's one component of it. But the other component is, I don't want to get too deep into it. I'll hold off until more information comes out. But you might remember, if you're a long-term listener, that when Mr. Abe died, they really had maybe 6 months of who's going to be the leader. If you vote for me, I'll vote for you, and they never got around to it. Nobody could decide, and so they finally came up with a group of 6 people, and then there was a little bit of always jockeying. One of those individuals fell out, and he's very powerful, but he was kind of implicated because he was with the Unification Church, and maybe it's better if you're not seen as a leader of the Abe faction. And I think it was just a scheme to push him out because other people, Mr. Nishimura, in fact, was also implicated in the Unification Church. And it came out just this last week that Mr. Kishida hosted, when he was foreign minister, hosted the leader of the Unification Church globally, and Newt Gingrich, who was previously the Speaker of the House of the United States. He hosted them in a briefing in the Prime Minister's, in the I think it was at the Foreign Ministry. And so he's got this picture of him with the Unification Church and Newt Gingrich. What in the hell is going on there? So people are really wondering how that happened. But in any event, it's not just because he might have had an affiliation with the Unification Church, because that paintbrush is pretty wide and the paint on it is pretty thick. But there was one individual that was pushed out. And I think, if you're looking for a compatriot and a conspirator to kind of get some revenge back, I think that that makes a lot of sense to me. And that's kind of the way politics works. I mean, even within the political factions, they're basically frenemies. They like each other. They deal with each other. They're very polite. They speak Keigo. They go to each other's parties. But they really, if it wasn't for you standing there, I could be in a better position. So, if I can find an opportunity where, you're doing something untoward, or maybe your star will fall a little bit, and they're all very, very afraid of that sort of thing happening. So, long-winded answer. I think I will get into it more specifically when we do that briefing with Dan Harada in 2 weeks' time. But thanks for the question. I hope I didn't tease you too much.
Well, we always do. I believe that maybe that's why our listeners come just to listen to your teasing them. Who knows? Okay, yes, sorry. And then we have another question in Clubhouse, which is from Camilo this time, Camilo Sandoval. Thank you very much for the question.
Hi,
yes, so Camilo wrote, "Good morning. I would love to hear any thoughts today about discussions with Japan's ruling coalition to ease restrictions on defense exports have grounded to a halt because of junior partner Komeito. Is the backstory and just a moment. Okay, is there a backstory, and is the resistance temporary?"
Okay, so for those who are not quite up to speed, so the Prime Minister decided to spend from 1% of GDP to 2% of GDP over a 5-year period. So that started last year, and they bought lots of equipment, mostly not just exclusively from the United States, but a lot from the United States. The Patriot missiles, for example, and certain other Aegis destroyers, that sort of thing. And the United States has a real vested interest that Japan comes up and pays the price for being a very powerful military force. And within the Prime Minister of Mr. Kishida, they have found you would have thought maybe Mr. Abe, because he was more right-hand leaning, and Mr. Kishida is a little bit more towards the center. And you would have thought that maybe it would have been Abe's play to do that, but it was Mr. Kishida's, and maybe he had a promise or an obligation to Mr. Abe to push that through. But in any event, he did, and it kind of upset a lot of people because they were saying, how are we going to pay for this? And he said, well, we've got the new economy, new capitalism, and we're going to have this virtuous cycle, and people are going to invest, and then we're going to have this incubation hub centered in Shibuya, and all of these things are going to happen, and it's going to be just beautiful. And it didn't really transpire. They had to back off a little bit on the pace. So for 5 years, they're going to go from 1% to 2%. and the prime minister had to back off a little bit, saying in year 2 we're going to back off just a tiny bit because the cigarette taxes and the taxes that we're going to be generating from personal and from corporates, it's not going to be enough. So we need to recalibrate that. And then a strange thing happened 2 weeks ago. We reported here again that the prime minister said the amount of funds that we said that the amount of material that we said that we were going to produce last year for this year, when the yen was at 135 to the dollar, and now the yen is at 151 to the dollar, the amount is going to stay the same, and the products that we're going to purchase are going to stay the same. So that doesn't quite make sense. If you're going to purchase it when the yen is at a different value, it makes a huge impact. But that's what he said. So the opposition party, so they're in a coalition with Komeito. Komeito is the party of peace. They're dedicated to raising the standard of living and equalizing, the lifestyle and the living of the Japanese population, and they're committed to preserving Article 9 of the Constitution. So they're strange bedfellows in a certain way, but they do produce a lot of voters for the LDP when it comes to election time. And I think it's a relatively good, strong coalition. But they do wield considerable power, and if they say, look, we really don't support this, you need to accommodate us, then the prime minister, if he's weak, he needs to accommodate them so that the coalition stays strong. And if he's strong, then he can say, well, look, maybe I'll give it to you the next time, but this one is really important to me, so thank you very much for your visit. I've got somebody else waiting to see me, right? So the current question by Camilo is, what is the status now? Are they going to withhold purchasing some equipment? And people are in the United States or the military industrial complex want to sell their product, and conversely, the Japanese want to develop a military industrial complex too. They've seen what's happened in the United States, what's happened in Israel. You develop the technology and you embed it with new high-end sensors and new technology, and you sell it throughout the world, and you get a huge income from that. So military hardware is really high-end. It generates a huge profit, and it's kind of expendable. If there's a conflict, then you need to purchase more of whatever that military hardware is. So with regard to defensive capabilities for military wear, the Japanese can export certain amounts of that, but only to certain countries. And I think right now it's limited to the United States under agreement, but it might include one or two other countries, but I know it's very restricted. And in terms of offensive capabilities, there's a complete ban on that because they try and recharacterize it as dual use. So they came up with, you might remember that the Japanese government published 3 articles on the defense planning of Japan this time last year. And one of those said, you can't export these offensive capable technologies, helicopters and guns and things like that, if, even though they're offensive, they're used for search and rescue, they're used for mine sweeping, they're used for, there are 4 or 5 categories there. So I think, the relationship between Japan and the United States, Kurt Campbell was in the Foreign Relations Committee just this last week, emphasizing how important Japan is to the United States and how this relationship is is practically the most important bilateral relationship in the world. Most people in the past wouldn't hedge their bets. They would say it is, but he said it's almost or it's likely to be the most important. So there's a little bit of something in the background there, but Kurt Campbell is somebody who's been involved in this sort of thing for a long time. So we wait to see, and I will try and keep that in mind as this develops to give you a better, crisper answer to that. But also, Camilo, not just directed at you, but for anybody else in the audience, if you have an idea or something that's bothering you, or you're working on a project and you have something in particular that is important to you, just shoot a message to Maya or to me on LinkedIn and say, when you have this next briefing, could you please address in a little bit more detail or context this issue that I have? So with that, Maya.
Yes, we appreciate all the prompts we receive and will receive, would receive, and so on, because it also helps us understand what is of importance to you, and we can prepare better for answering these questions. So please do not be shy and always let us know whenever you have a specific question. And then also, Timothy, we have a comment from Ed Thompson on LinkedIn. So
Hi,
Ted
Ed.
wrote, hello, Ed wrote, Japan does have an amphibious force, the JGSDF, Amphibious Rapid Deployment Brigade, and there is a link there. So for those who are curious and would like to know more about this, I invite you to go to the LinkedIn account of Japan Expert Insights, and click on the link and learn more about this. Also, I have a couple of questions to you,
Wait,
Timothy. That
before you go on. So the
yes.
United States Marines just celebrated their birthday, 125 years, I think. Ed, if you can correct me on that. So they have been in existence for a long time. Their
Mhm.
technologies, their esprit de corps, their traditions, it is just it's unmatched anywhere else in the world. Although some countries would question that. But with regard to the Japanese Expeditionary Force, yes, they did launch that 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, in close combination with the United States Marines, and trying to teach them, amphibious landing and kind of guerrilla warfare and that sort of thing. But when you think about what an expeditionary force does, it is to extract somebody who has invaded or taken over an island or that sort of thing. And I think the although the expeditionary force has been launched, um, I think there's just it's like with the Ospreys, there were no SDF personnel involved in that, and I'm sure that there are joint training exercises. But I've got to imagine if you're a United States Marine and in charge of these kinds of trainings and that sort of thing, you're considering maybe the Japanese component of that just a little bit wanting. It's just, I mean, it's tough for even people who have been lifting weights and handling guns all their lives when they were growing up to be competent in that, to be, Delta Force or U.S. Marines, that sort of thing. But here in this country, with the pacifism going on for the last 90 years, it's really difficult. I mean, even the self defense forces has a difficult time recruiting people to come in, and so they have posters for girls too. Please come in and join the self defense forces. It's a great life, a great tradition. So it is a difficult nut to crack. But great comment there. Thanks, Ed.
Yes, thank you, Ed. And there is another comment on LinkedIn from Hiroko. So, actually, it's a question. So, her question is, can Japan purchase some offensive weapons under the collective defense right? So, this is the
Okay,
question.
so yeah, they can. Um, Initially, they couldn't, and so they had to rely on the United States. You provide that. You
Mhm.
provide that stuff, and we'll provide the defensive stuff, or maybe some dual use stuff. And if push comes to shove, we will be in a support role. We'll be refueling. We'll be adding rescue, search and rescue. We'll be doing mine sweeping because that's also defensive in character. So there's certain components that we will handle. We will be in charge of that. But on the offensive capabilities, you guys please do it. But you'll note that 400 Tomahawks were purchased by the Japanese, and those, yeah, I guess you could say technically those are potentially dual use, but they distinctly have an offensive capability too. And the United States just announced that they're selling an advanced version of these missiles. They're on trucks that hold a battery of four. They're highly advanced for these supersonic missiles that are now being developed by Russia and China. You might have been following a little bit of that. So the United States has upped the ante. I don't know if those are actually going to be run and operated and owned by the United States. It's unlikely that the highest technology is going to be sold to the Japanese. And one of the other reasons is, just this leak of confidential information and the sieve that people perceive. I mean, Japan isn't even a part of the Five Eyes, where confidential security information can be shared between, several countries, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, uh, Australia, Britain. But it can't, Japan is not a part of that because there have been so many gaffes where people have gone drinking and they've forgotten their backpack that had the codes for the ships or whatever. So it's just but they're doing much better on that. The administration has launched a new way of having security details and checks and balances, and also the due diligence for people to have security clearance. And we talked about this maybe 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so thank you for the answer, Timothy. And yes, I want to say also, well, thank you very much to Rumiko, because she has been sharing links about taxes here in Japan on LinkedIn. So if you're curious about that, if you would like to learn more, once again, I invite you to go to the LinkedIn account of Japan Expert Insights and check out those links. Also, we have a comment from Ed. Agree with all of Timothy's comments about the difficulty of building an amphibious force. ARGB is relatively small compared to the US, but an initial capability to add to Japan's defense force. So thank you very much, Ed. And of course, if you have other comments or questions or clarifications, please do not hesitate to join us even in Clubhouse or share them on LinkedIn as well. Okay, and we have also Yuka in Clubhouse, but I have a question. So Yuka, just could you please give me a couple of minutes so that I can torture Timothy with my question first?
Yeah, no, I'm all for torturing Timothy, so please go ahead.
So you have great fans here. I know that you have noticed that. Okay, so well, you mentioned about the demise, let's say, the probable or possible demise of the Abe faction, and I wondered what are the options there. So we say that probably the faction, will suffer and so on. But do you expect it to, let's say, disappear entirely, and then the members, just they join other factions, or do you expect it to change its name, just a marketing trick for them or whatever? What do you think might happen to that powerful body within the LDP?
Okay, so kind of to answer that question, you've got to understand that earlier in Japanese politics, the conservatives were split into 2 or 3 different groups, and the communists and the socialists were almost competing with them in terms of size. And so what the LDP did, or what the Liberal Party and the Democratic Party did, at the insistence or at the support of the CIA in the United States, they formed a coalition that they called the Liberal Party and the Democratic Party. They joined them together, and it's the Liberal Democratic Party. But not everything melded together like, in a smelter. There are still groups and kagels, and if you've worked in a Japanese company, you know this very well, that no matter what happens, there's always, an in-group and an out-group, and all of these different factions that exist even within a commercial enterprise. And in politics, it's even worse. So even though the LDP formed together as a coalition of these parties, the individual components of it split up into factions, and that's where the factions came from. So the Abe faction is not really the Abe faction. It's called Seiwakai or Seiwaken. And just as a shortcut, we always mention that the faction leader is the person who is the head. So the Motegi faction, for example. All of these factions had their core when the Liberal Party and the Democratic Party came together. So it's very rare, it's unusual for a new faction to come out that doesn't have its roots in that initial crockpot of coming together and forming a coalition against the opposition parties. And they were very successful. And as a result of that, the LDP has been in power the entire time post-war period, except for a very brief period when the LDP slipped up. So getting back to what happens to the Abe faction. So the Seiwakai will continue to exist. It won't be 100. It won't be 99 people. And I think we've already kind of noticed that, because it doesn't have a firm individual person. Everybody else, they have a firm leader. Everybody knows that the Aso faction is held by Mr. Aso. He's been the faction leader for 20 years. Nobody can touch him within the faction. Even Konotaro, who is, the digital minister now and a candidate for prime minister, even he's in the Aso faction. Even he must, kind of kowtow to Mr. Aso. So all of these factions exist for a reason. It's not just personality. It's deeper than that. But with the Abe faction, there is power in numbers, and they couldn't bring it together because everybody was so jealous or suspicious, or they didn't really, it's just terrible. Mr. Abe didn't even select one of these 5 guys or 6 guys, depending on how you count it. He never even selected one of them to be his successor when it came time to have a prime minister's race. Mr. Suga got it, but in that race, he didn't even appoint one of his guys. Had he done that, whoever he had fingered would have been the prime minister. He didn't do that. Instead, he picked somebody outside of his faction, Takaichi, to be the candidate. He threw his weight to her, and he also told the rest of his faction, vote for who you want. I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire. It's an open ticket. Who cares, right? So I think the most likely scenario is that of these 5 members, these 5 powerful members of the Abe faction who are the committee to control it, they will all split off and form their own faction. So probably Mr. Seko will, and he's already talked about this as a possible option for him before this scandal came out. He was talking about this a month ago, that he might have a faction, which would be pretty significant. He's in the upper house. He's very powerful in the upper house. To have all of his Abe faction upper house members join with him, and that's still a likelihood. So probably almost 40% of the Abe faction consists of upper house members. So Mr. Seko really carries considerable weight there. With Mr. Nishimura, it really kind of all depends also on how this unification church issue shakes out. Mr. Kishida is going to suffer from that, but he's not in the Abe faction. So the Abe faction still has a little bit of bloodletting to do with regard to the unification church. So they were pressed upon to protect the unification church when this scandal broke out. And when everything is said and done and the unification church loses its church status, its tax status, then there's going to be some retribution, and maybe the story's going to come out. This is how we helped this particular politician, and when it came time for him to help us, he was nowhere around. So screw these guys. We had a religious organization that was going for 30, 40 years, and it was helping people, and you guys decided that it wasn't you guys didn't decide, but your opposition party decided. You were riding a little bit too easy with it. And now, we're extinct. So we're going to call a spade, and here's the story. So Bunshun, please send a reporter over. So you've got that coming up as well.
Right. But at the end of the day, so Mr. Kishida, who is under fire at the moment, he may be the beneficiary of all that happening.
Yeah. So you would think that there are some members who will just parachute out and they'll go to another faction. Mm-hmm. And the factions, of course, would accept them because there's power in numbers. But the reason why people become politicians in the first place is to become prime minister. And it's highly unlikely, as a consequence of this fracture, this disintegration, that anybody that was in the Abe faction will have any chance, even joining another faction, and they're going to bring some members with them. And so maybe they'll get a little bit more benefit, but their dream of becoming prime minister is probably severely reduced. And not only that, but I think most people would acknowledge Mr. God, why did his name slip my name? In any event, there are other political figures that are in the opposition party that are looking at this and seeing an opportunity to topple the LDP. That's what they've been wanting to do. That's what this Maihata and Tamaki issue is all about. Do we join forces with the LDP so that we become stronger and that eventually maybe we get into a coalition, or do we join forces with the opposition parties? Even we hold our nose and we join forces with the Communist Party. They don't have many members, but there is 10 members. It might make the difference. And let's topple the LDP. That is the most important thing. Topple the LDP, hold your nose, eat the spinach, get the prize, and then let's figure it out later. So I think that there's a lot going on there.
Okay, so we'll be following
Ozawa,
this.
I'm sorry. Ozawa was the name I was trying to recall. So Ozawa is distinctly a genius on Japanese politics. He was the architect of collapsing the LDP in the past. He was a darling of the LDP, you might remember. They kind of treated him poorly and didn't let him be LDP president. They kind of treated him brusquely, so he went and took his ball and went to another team. And so he is a force to contend with. He's been awful quiet these last couple of years. Maybe for 10 years he's been awful quiet, but he's beginning to raise his head again, and he's also a force to contend with.
Well, okay, let's follow that too. And Yuka, I'm sorry for keeping you waiting. I apologize for this. Yes, thank you for your patience.
No, good. Yeah, no, I learned a new expression. So hold your nose and eat spinach. Good,
yeah.
Right. So spinach is good for you. So
not when you're 6 years old.
That's true. Yeah, but I just remember the Popeye. But anyway, so I like to sort of ask you the first sort of like a question, and then like a background information, and then question.
Okay.
So my understanding is post-war Japanese constitution is based on U.S. law. Am I correct on this, right? Pretty much. Not.
So yeah, it's more complicated than that, but I think what you're getting at, the post-war constitution was written and drafted by the Americans because they had lofty ideals. It doesn't represent what the United States, it represents what they aspired to, and they had a chance to once again have another bite at the apple, but it doesn't completely benefit the United States. It benefits the Japanese people, and it gets them away from this military mindset, and it reduces the role of the emperor, and it ensures everybody in the Southeast Asia that the Japanese will never arise to a military force forever and ever. So that's, it's not accurate to say that it's American centric.
Okay, but I think it's sort of like the genesis of the, the sort of like a sort of, my what I'm getting at is just very sort of minor or the detailed portion of the Constitution. Earlier this week, you might have heard, the publisher Kadokawa has suspended the publication of a translation version of the book. It's the American book. It's called The Irreversible Damage, the transgender, gender change craze amongst teenage daughters. Yeah, I sort of like botched the title. But what this book is, there are so many, those teenagers, girls are changing their gender when they're so young. And then there are damages because of that. I think it's just, and then there was the translation available, but I think it's a huge sort of like, this, the sort of Kadokawa just decided, sort of yielded to the opposition about the publication. So they have suspended the publication. My question is, so in Japanese constitution, there must be a clause about freedom of the speech, right?
Yes.
Okay, so why on the U.S. they were published? I think it's just like a widely, read, and there's, and I think it's probably the the high ranking amongst New York Times bestseller. So why in Japan those freedom of opinion, expression, speech is not really enforced? It's not encouraged.
I don't know much about this, the background here, but if Kadokawa is producing the book, to break even, if you have 1,500 copies produced and you have a pretty high uh, confidence that you will sell 1,500 copies of the book, they'll usually go into their first production. So from a production and for a consumer perspective, I think Kadokawa said, first of all, if we produce or we do the translation of this book, are we going to sell that many books? That's the first issue. And then the second issue is Kadokawa internally says at their board meeting, do we want to print this? Is this an affiliation we want to be known for? Do we want to be seen as promoting this kind of lifestyle? And the Americans, they're so screwed up. So, let them do their thing, but we're going to do our thing. And there might be some political pressure. I kind of doubt it. Kadokawa is a private company, but I think they still have freedom of speech. But I just think maybe first on an economic level and maybe on an ethical level at the second point, that they just decided, if people want to read it, let them read it in English. But we don't think going through the process of translating it, it's going to generate much of a feedback loop to Kadokawa. I don't know. I'm sorry. I just
great. I think no, like it's great. So that's why I love asking your question, because actually I didn't think of that. The profitability part of it. You're right. They are a company, so they have to make profit. So yeah, right. Maybe it wasn't come from this political pressure. You're right. It's probably economic decision making.
Yeah.
At play.
I don't think I don't think it's a freedom of speech issue.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, and can I ask quickly? I'm sorry, I sort of I violated my own assumption of one question today, but about the Edo Castle. So yes. I sort of missed you're saying that so they're going to restore the Edo Castle, right? It's not. I thought they were going to do it just as another tourism draw. So it's not. Oh, so you're not talking about that. It's more historical. Okay.
I'm not talking about that. So okay, what you might be talking about is the main dungeon. So the Edo Castle is a fabulous. It's a walk. You can enter it. You can't enter all areas of it, but you can see the fortifications. It's never been attempted to be attacked. It was a huge fortification, and it was massive in scale. It took them, probably 100 years to build it, but it's never been attacked. There's never been one attack on it. And even during World War II, no bombs fell within the palace complex. They never fell on the Diet complex either, as a planned matter. It wasn't a mistake. They didn't bomb either of those, but everything else, Kasumigaseki, where the National Diet is, that was completely obliterated. So that whole area there was just a cinder block. But the main dungeon, it would be nice if they rebuilt the main dungeon. I think it would attract a lot of people there. As it stands right now, the foundation is there, so you can walk up to the foundation, and when you're standing on the foundation, you can clearly see Mount Fuji, and it gives you a real panoramic view. But that site was particularly selected by Tokugawa, and it did have a house there that built up the land to a bigger site before. But this whole garden, this is where not so much the emperor, but the shogun was held residence, and it's in that little garden there. That's where the story of the 47 Ronin initially started, in one of the residences there. So a lot of history there.
Okay, great, thank you. So, and then we're going to have Imperial Palace and Edo Castle. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so people call it the Imperial Palace. People call it the Edo Castle. The castle itself are the embankments and the moats, and I think it's the central part is also called Edo Castle. But since they moved the emperor up, Tokugawa moved the emperor, he took him out of Kyoto and moved him into Tokyo, making it, the center of culture and religion then. And that's how the shogun became, the master of the entire archipelago. by moving the emperor up there. But he took a lower role as a consequence of that, and the Tokugawas for 4 generations ruled Japan for almost 400 years.
Yes. Okay. So thank you for that.
Same age as me.
Right. Same age as you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So, and then Timothy, there is one more comment here in Clubhouse. Yes. Okay. Thank you, by Gerard. And so it's an interesting comment. Maybe probably it was written with what do you say that tongue in cheek. But so Gerard wrote, we all thought the Abe assassin was crazy, but if it turns out to bring down that it will bring down the Unification Church in Japan, breaking up the Abe faction and the LDP losing power, every Japanese high school student is going to have to learn about Mr. Tetsuya Yamagami for decades to come. Yes, maybe that's a very astute observation. We don't know that at the moment, but thank you for making the comment.
Can I reflect on that just a little bit? Thanks very much, Jared. So it's like, what were the 2 guys that broke the scandal on the Watergate? Woodward and somebody else. But as a consequence of these guys writing the book about the break-in and being the spokesperson for how this thing happened and getting Richard Nixon kicked out of office, yes, they ignited a whole generation of people who wanted to participate in journalism and investigative journalism, and it really enriched the industry incredibly. And I think what Jared is saying is that since this person, this no-name person, kind of came up with a research document and decided that he was going to expose somebody, yeah, it could. I mean, look at the power, the influence that has had on people. And it's probably true that Woodford and the other fellow whose name I can't recall, it could be that, yes, it wasn't just them. It was a lot of other people. It was Deep Throat. It was other people that really helped them there. Similarly, I think with Kamiwaki-san or Kamiwaki Professor, I think it's Kamiwaki, it's Kadawaki. I think similarly with him, although he's receiving the all of the accolades, it wasn't all by him. I mean, there was a lot of other people that were involved in that, and so yeah. But he might be the one that gets the lion's share of the accolades for that. Hiroshi Kamiwaki, yeah, Kobe Gakushin University.
Right. Yes, and thank you, Camilo, for yes, it is Woodward and Carol Bernstein or Bernstein.
Woodward and Bernstein, yeah.
Bernstein. Okay, sorry for the pronunciation. Yes. So, well, that's another thing that we have to wait and see, what happens with it. But yeah, thank you very much for the comments and for the help from everybody. And then, yes, let's see. Okay, so Rumiko, yes, that's a good comment as well. Well, I'm not sure that it is directly related to politics, but Rumiko wrote, I would genuinely appreciate if everyone knew that there were female emperors and samurai ladies to lead people without male partners always. Yep. Thank you very much for that. Yes, throughout history, we just tend to forget that. Yes.
Predominantly, in fact, in Japanese history, it was women.
Women, right? Yes. So at some point, maybe we'll go back to our roots, and remember history as well. So thank you very much for this, Timothy. It looks like we have gone through all the questions and comments at the moment. So thank you to everybody, and also in Clubhouse. Yes, Richard Walton is still there. We'll have. We have a couple of the other participants in the tour yesterday. So Rempao and well, also we have Mr. Ando was there as well. So to everybody who joined us, once again, thank you. And Richard gave us the exact number of participants, 25. So thank you very much for that, Richard. We appreciate it. To the people who joined a little bit later, who are based in Japan, maybe who are based in Kanto, we are thinking about another event in the end of January, which is going to be most probably in Kamakura, another crossover event between YCAPS and Japan Expert Insights. So
Great idea.
please, yes, I think it's a great idea. And we're looking forward to having you there. That's all for today. Timothy, your final
Oh,
thoughts?
Maya,
Yes.
sorry.
Yes.
I've been meaning to ask. So what Whitecap does? Is it like a? I'm sorry. I think I looked that up. So they're like a recruiting agency. Am I wrong?
No,
Uh,
no. It's maybe we can get Ed to come up on stage, but YCAPS is like an intellectual group of people focused on military strategy, history throughout the Asia Pacific, mostly with
Oh,
regard to Japan.
I apologize. I'm so sorry. I couldn't be more wrong. Sorry about everybody. I'm so
So
sorry. Okay.
no, that's okay. A lot of people don't know that, but they host webinars maybe
yes.
once or twice a week, and invariably there are 160 people that show up from all over the world. So YCAPS has a lot of pull. It's got a lot of people with former military experience. They were stationed in Japan. They continue to love Japan. They're working on Japan issues when they've been sent back to their home country. So it's a really great organization.
Yes, and their webinars are always very insightful and informative about, they are not only about the current affairs, but also history of Japan and the region, and ties of Japan with other countries, and they are really a great source of information about what's going on in Japan and in the region as well. So I'm sure that you can find them on LinkedIn as well, or you can Google a YCAPS and find more information
I
about
thought
them.
I did, and I was still wrong. Sorry. I just embarrassed the heck out of myself again.
We all do that. It's not, it happens to everybody, and that's what makes us human at the end of the day. So, because if you thought that we were alien, now you know that we are not. So, oh no, Timothy, that's anyway. Okay, so it's time for us to say goodbye today and wish you a great Sunday. It's a beautiful day here. It's warm. Next week we'll probably have a kind of cold weather, some rain. So I think that it's today. Today is the chance to enjoy the season before it gets cold and rainy again. Timothy, thank you very much for the briefing today, and to everybody, everybody who stayed with us. We'll be here once again live next Sunday at 8:20. Before that, on Wednesday, we are going to have a special guest at 8 o'clock in Clubhouse and also on LinkedIn, talking about their experience in studying and working in Japan as well. So join us. That's all for today. Have a great day.
If you like the synopsis, let us know.
Yes,
I'm
that's
going to hold it hostage until we get like
I
20
I do. Okay.
Yes, and Gerard already wrote that he did and found those synopses is very important. So yes, and then Richard again. I like the synopsis too. So Timothy, you have the proof, okay? Yes, all right.
Kind of.
And wrote yes.
But
okay,
there's so many other people who are just being silent. They're not free riders, but they're kind of free riders. They benefit from the work and the energy that we put into it. All I'm saying is, reciprocate. Try and help us expand the reach of this program so that people who should know and should be involved. It's like Yuko was saying about YCAP. She didn't know about it. Well, somebody's not doing the right job in proliferating, and I don't want to be accused of that. I want people who should know to know that we talk about Japanese politics weekly. It's a big deal. Nobody else does it in the world. And so I just like, if you're dealing with any form of commerce with Japan, politics is an important component of that. So let the audience, expand.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Timothy. So I'm going to let everybody free now, because if we keep them here telling them that we want their approval and
That's right.
and so on, everybody's going to run away eventually. So thanks again. That's all. Have a great
Thanks,
day.
everybody.
We'll see you next time.
Thank
Oh,
you, Maya,
Timothy,
for your support. Yeah.
and thank you. Put your best smile now.